dance from the other song.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
It's time for rock and roll. Yes, I am German that rocks.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
When you mix rock and roll with Germans, it can get kind of crazy. My name is Mike. I'm part German and I'm also part Stacy. Stacy makes no name mention to say about that. I'm singing like a rock singer does, where lyrics don't make any sense because you can't understand what they're saying, but it's still a fantastic song.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
I'm part Stacy. Yes. Hey, this is why I am glad I am not some
Mike's
famous rock star.
Daily.
I can't come up with
Podcast
lyrics very well, and
yeah,
I can't come up with album names. How do they keep coming up with album names? I was thinking about it the other day that Tears for Fears, whom we were speaking about on a recent podcast, which they have done I guess a couple years back, they did a Spotify concert, which you can see on YouTube, where they were honoring the 30th anniversary of the songs from the Big Chair album that had Everyone Wants to Rule the World, and the other one called Shout and Head Over Heels, which, by the way, is a music video that features a drumming rabbi. And for that and that alone, it is the best video that was ever made in the 80s. And there's is it a chimpanzee that's doing this kind of a dance thing and kissing Kurt Smith? And Roland Orzabel's got his backpack on and his little trench coat and his mullet curly hairdo. So the question is, with Tears for Fears, there's songs from the Big Chair, which was named aptly thus because they had seen the movie Sybil, and they had done a song that was featuring lyric or pieces of the movie, which they never got sued for, they said, and they were thankful about that. And so they had that.
And here's today's podcast picture,
Which I don't think it's on the album. Songs from the Big Chair, oddly enough. But if you go and get the B-side album thing, which, yes, I went out and bought that because I wanted to be completely up to date and be the hugest Tears for Fears fan. But that, sad me, I know, sad me, Mad World, that's the other album, The Hurting. But Songs from the Big Chair, they called it that because of the Big Chair is involved. That's something involved with the movie Sybil. I know, Basil, I never watched Sybil with you, but it's supposed to be good. Yes. My lovely lady friend is a therapist, and so that movie would be very interesting to her, I'm sure. Woman, Sybil's got multiple personalities. Basil loved my lovely lady friend very, very much. She's no longer with us, but I was looking at some videos yesterday because yesterday was a company day off, which I'm very thankful for. Good Friday. Companies I've worked for in the past never let me have anything to do with Easter off. I mean, you always get Sunday off anyway, but Good Friday off, now that's awesome. And I have had some great Good Fridays in the past, and since I started the job, first I had Basil the boxer. I had him for 10 and a half years. And then I got my job. I think I had Basil for about 5 years when I got the job at the company I work for. And they were saying, oh, and you get Good Friday off. And I was like, really? Okay. And Basil and I had some amazing adventures together on Good Friday in the past. In fact, I'm going to post a podcast picture from one of my amazing Basil adventures in the past. You can see it at MikesDailyPodcast.com. So I was thinking a lot about my dearly departed dear dog son. I was thinking a lot about him yesterday. I've just been thinking a lot about him recently, just overall, and it's been tough. It's been tough because the last year was not that good. And to those of you who know me, I don't know if you know that, I mean, how rough it was the past year. I've talked about it on the podcast, but the last couple of months of his life were really difficult. But he So I think about him a lot this time of year. And, I mean, this is the first year without him, but he and I did a lot of fun things together on Good Friday. We'd always have the day off and go on some fun adventure. Now, I was thinking a lot about that yesterday. And it was just the beginning of my Good Friday was not so good because I was very much sad about it, thinking about it. And that's the thing about grief. Grief is just a bizarre human emotion. And you never, ever, this is what all the experts say, don't feel goofy or silly or guilty about feeling grief, ever. If it washes over you, I mean, it shows up at the weirdest times. Something will trigger your memory. Something will come up. Maybe nothing will bring up the memory of a lost one. And you'll just be overcome with emotion. And just all the experts say. And my lovely lady friend has dealt with grief therapy. She had a grief group. And she just, I mean, really studied up on it, did her research on it when she did the grief group for about a year. And it unfortunately had to be disbanded once the pandemic started. She didn't want to mess with that Zoom thing with the multiple Zoom frames. It's tough to do a Zoom when you got a bunch more than one person that you're Zooming with. When you got multiple people, it can be a little jarring to jump from person to person. And yet somehow we make it work in our digital times. But she found out some interesting theories and thoughts about grief. And one of them is it just happens when it happens. And you can't feel guilty about it. And time doesn't necessarily make grief go away. And so don't feel like, oh my gosh, so much time has gone by. Why am I still grieving this person or this being, that Basil was? You know, why are you still grieving? There's no answer to the question why. It just happens. It just is. So, things to remember about that. There was a comment made in the television show Midsummer Murders, and the main character of the show, Tom Barnaby, played by John Nettles, he says something like he's at a cemetery, and he says, why do people grieve the dead? It only makes the death last longer. He said something to that effect, which I basically have disproven in this podcast, and my lovely lady friend would have yelled at him for saying that, because it's not true. It's not. It just happens. And grief, you got to work through it. You can't hold it in. I mean, you have to sometimes because you're with people and you don't want to start bawling your eyes out in front of them. Or maybe your friends are cool with that, so that's good. Some of that should be let out, but anyway, Cafe Anyway, I am not a psychologist. I am not a therapist. It just seems to me that grieving happens when it happens, and it's just going to keep happening over and over again, and it's good to work through that stuff and not to deny it. And your brain is how do we even process? This is an interesting time of year as we go outside of Cafe Anyway, where we bring in Mike's Daily Podcast somewhere in Podcastro Valley, the last place on earth. This is the time of year of rebirth, and we talk about Jesus on Easter weekend, and he rose from the dead. And then all around us, there's rebirth happening. There are trees coming back to life, little blossoms popping up. There are lots of different species of animals. Went back German again. I'm not going to sing a rock song in my German voice. Not going to sing a song by the Scorpions or by Rammstein or Falco After the Fire, Nina. No, I'm going to say that this time of year, we have all these different species of animals having little chicks, little babies born all over. The grass is growing nature. Okay, enough about that. So see the podcast picture at MikesDailyPodcast.com. Interesting stuff to tell you about real quickly here and such. Oh, and that is Songs from the Big Chair, Tears for Fears, right? Billy Joel had an album out around the same time called Songs from the Attic. Both of those albums, Songs from the Big Chair, Songs from the Attic, are my favorite albums. That Billy Joel album, though, was a live album. The Tears for Fears album was a studio album. But the live album that Billy Joel did, he basically said, I want to take all these songs that were album cuts from my previous early albums that were the studio recordings were awful. I didn't like them. I'm going to redo them with my band that I have now, which was in the early 80s. And I'm going to put out this album. We're going to do these songs the way our band does them. And he actually had a hit single with She's Got Away, which was released from that Songs from the Attic album. And I have been in such a Billy Joel mood these days because I love these days. That's from the Songs from the Big Chair album. And just some of the stuff he talks about with the making of these albums. And Liberty DeVito, his drummer, during that fantastic phase with his band at that time, the thing is, he loved those songs that Billy Joel wrote. Some of them he really got into, like Honesty, that originally was called Home Again, and then Billy Joel rewrote it. And Liberty DeVito did a drum seminar. I think this was 10 years ago. You could see it on YouTube. And he's talking about how, as a drummer, you have to know when to back off. Have to know when to leave a hole, and also when to put the fill in. He calls drumming the 4-beat, the do 1 2 3 4. He calls that the pants that the drummer's doing, the do, and then the fill is the shirts. Like, what shirt is going to go with those pants? Not every shirt goes with those pants. So he says you could have 75 different shirts, but they're all not going to go with those pants. That's the way he likened it. And then he performs Honesty, and he says, I'm going to do a slow song because I want you to see what I do with even though it's a slow song, there is going to be a lot going on. Let's watch. And he's, Honesty, and he's doing all that live. And this was 10 years ago, and dang it, he's such a good drummer. And I think he's got a new book out. And yeah, he fought with Billy Joel, but gosh, he was a big part of Billy Joel's, all those songs that made Billy Joel famous, Liberty DeVito was such a huge part of. And then he's just so Italian and so New York. I just love listening to him talk. Okay. Is there a right way to eat a chocolate bunny? Here's what a survey found. 78% of people say you got to eat the ears first. So that's like the number one thing. Eat the ears first. And then a smaller percentage say eat the feet first or eat the tail first. It reminds me of an Emo Phillips joke. That's not a type of music. It was a comedian. He had this weird haircut. Oh, speaking of weird comedians, Marty Feldman, there's a documentary on YouTube about him. Marty Feldman didn't always have those eyes. He's the guy that played Igor in Young Frankenstein. He actually got that when he had a thyroid issue, and he went in for surgery for it in the 60s, and they somehow messed up and left his eyes like that. His eyes were straight ahead before that, and then after that they were tilted slightly from not looking. They weren't aligned anymore after that, and they were slightly bulgy. But that actually launched his career because he had been a comedic writer before that. And then once he got on the camera, is it David Frost who is the guy that interviewed Richard Nixon? the Nixon Frost interviews. Anyway, that Frost guy was basically the one that hired Marty Feldman to do a bunch of comedy stuff for him, which eventually led to Marty Feldman having his own TV show. And this is before Monty Python got popular, and Marty knew those guys and hired those guys, and they were part of his show. And he became wildly popular in England. Then the next season, he did, I think we call them seasons, there they call them series. But the next season, he didn't employ Monty Python as much. The guys in Monty Python wrote a bunch of sketches for him. He turned them all down, basically, which then Monty Python, they launched after that. They basically left Marty Feldman and took all those scripts that he had turned down and rejected, and they had huge hits with those skits. They performed them on Flying Circus, and they became classics. So Marty Feldman, meanwhile, he's trying to get popular in America, which eventually he did with Young Frankenstein. But he was much, much, much more popular in England. And there you go, Marty Feldman, comedic actors. Okay, so Emo Phillips said something about eating a bunny, a chocolate bunny, and saying that a psychologist once had him eat a chocolate bunny in front of him. And once he took the first bite, he said to the psychologist, okay, what did this mean exactly? Why did you have me do this? And the psychologist said, well, you know, everything that where you eat the bunny means something. Like, you know, if you eat the head first, it means you have a superiority complex. You have that. And then if you eat the tail first, you have an inferiority complex. If you eat the middle first, you've got weight issues. And he goes, what if you rip off the head and scream at it, I hate you, you're not my daddy, I hate you. And the psychologist said, it means you have suicidal tendencies. And Emo Phillips said, well, what should I do? And the doctor said, go for it. It's much funnier when Emo does it, but he probably hasn't done that joke in 30 years. All right. This is the second pandemic Easter, believe it or not. A new survey asked people about the differences in their plans this year versus last year's. 55% of people will celebrate Easter at home this year versus 68% last year. 18% will go to church this year versus 10% last year. So, less people will be celebrating Easter at home, I guess. Disneyland just started selling a fried pickle corn dog. Yes, Disneyland, they're opening up. There's a lot of restrictions, though, versus, I mean, Florida's got a lot of restrictions, but Anaheim's got even more. So a fried pickle corn dog is a hot dog inside a pickle inside of a fried corn dog batter. And it comes with a side of peanut butter. Wow. And I noticed the Disney parks are trying to do more and more with outrageous food. Because people, you know, they associate, when you go to the fair, what's one of the things you do is, aside from the crazy rides, you eat crazy food. That's become more and more of a thing. And I guess we'll be going back to fairs this year, probably. A new study by Pfizer reveals that their coronavirus vaccine remains 91% effective after 6 months. So that's what we have found out. Toilet paper prices are skyrocketing. And Newser says that toilet paper prices are going to skyrocket in the next several months because the cost of wood pulp has jumped 35% over the last year. Scott and Viva will adjust their prices in late June. And Continental. Did you do an April Fool's Day joke? An April Fool's Day joke went awry in Wichita, Kansas. A woman called her daughter and told her she had been shot and then hung up. The daughter called 911, then rushed to her mom's home. Police officers also went to the mother's home with their guns drawn. They broke down the front door but didn't find anyone inside. The daughter called her mother again. She was at work and said her call was an April Fool's Day joke. They arrested her mom. Dun dun. I was trying to do a little Law and Order thing, but... Oh, and check this out. In sauced barbecue and plucked chicken in Livermore and Pleasanton, they've announced that they will take over the bocce courts at the recently closed Campo di Bocce on Vineyard Avenue. Their new concept, debauchery, botchery, will open this summer with bocce and a host of other attractions, including axe throwing, shuffleboard, and foot pool. The game in which soccer is played atop a pool table. Wow. Brilliant. Brilliant. That's happening right here in the East Bay. Costco members respond to the poll that Costco had on their Facebook page. I'm pulling this from the Costco connection. I'm being obnoxious. But hey, it's Mike's Daily Podcast, and we do that outside a cafe anyway, somewhere in Podcaster Valleyton. Good old paper books. E-books hurt my eyes, and I love the feel of actually holding an adventure in my hands, says one reader. Regular books for me, audiobooks tend to put me to sleep unless I'm actively doing a puzzle or something. Did you hear that, what's his name? He was the former Speaker of the House. John Boehner. I had no idea. He hated Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is from, believe it or not, what do you call it? He has a Cuban background. Cuban ancestry. Remember Trump poked fun at his dad? Okay. John Boehner, in his latest book, he did the audiobook. He read it himself. John Boehner's. And he said, while he was recording it, they didn't put this in the audiobook, but he said some kind of derogatory thing about Ted Cruz. He did not like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was basically, he said, just full of himself and impossible to work with. It was easier to work with Obama than work with Ted Cruz. I guess brain food for bookworms. This list of facts compiled by Mashable, Yahoo News, and Hello Giggles is sure to keep you glued to the page. What? Not Google? Google, by the way, is having their employees go back to work, or like 50% of them or something. Actually come back into the office. Yikes. Let's see. Leonardo da Vinci's Codex Leicester is the most expensive book ever purchased. Bill Gates bought it in 1994 for $30 million. Stephen King's Writing the Bullet, published in 2000, was the world's first mass market ebook. A study finds that reading for just 6 minutes each day can help reduce stress by 68%. The top 3 most read books in the world are the Bible, quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, and Harry Potter, the series. This one person that wrote to Costco said, I only read ebooks. I don't like holding a hard copy in bed at night. My 18-year-old daughter is just the opposite. And another reader says, depending on the situation, I prefer an ebook or physical book. I dislike audiobooks since I can read faster than the narrator and with as much comprehension and enjoyment. Yeah, seriously. Before you go see a movie, if you heard that the book was really good, read the book. Don't go see the movie. I know I sound like an old curmudgeon, but dang it. Your brain needs it. And I need to read. That's why I'm pulling out Good Success by E. Arthur Self, Ph.D. Learning good lessons from bad leaders. Here's what he says. The inability to let people off the hook strategically. He says, over the last few decades, the fish and game department in many states have adopted catch and release programs. Many sport and commercial fisheries applaud the decision to create catch and release programs as a reasonable, ecologically sound policy for the management and propagation of the fish population. Letting fish off the hook makes sense for the fish, fishery stocks, and fisher persons who get the fun of landing a fish while the fish survives and escapes the frying pan. Yeah, but does the fish really? I actually caught a fish, one of the few times I caught a fish as a kid. And the fish, I'd throw him back because he was too small. I threw the fish into the water, and no joke, this happened in the high Sierras. And this isn't a joke, it's very sad actually. The fish swam back to me, back to the shore. And was basically like, put me out of my misery. Yeah. Was not a good thing. Well, my stepfather took the fish out and ended up killing him. He was the fish killer of the family. He would, chop them up. And yeah, I know it's sad and horrific. And this was in the 70s. And I don't think I've gone fishing since. Or if I did, I never caught a fish again. And it serves me right. I'm a bad angler. So off the hook means good things for fish and for humans. Letting people off the hook has tactical value if effectively executed, or horrible consequences, as you just heard, if badly utilized. You can permanently damage the fish if you do not properly handle and care for it. That's true too if humans are not properly let off the hook. On occasion, you can gain by not emphatically holding people, teams, and organizations accountable to standards, practices, and policies. Occasionally, you achieve more by relenting than by pressing coworkers for 100% adherence to policy. Most bad leaders don't see the value of off-the-hook strategy, nor do they have the discernment or discipline to engage in it. However, letting people off the hook cannot become a primary go-to default strategy. Doing so regularly creates lower performance and compliance standards. People see leaders who default in this direction as weak, tentative, and lacking disciplinary grit. That's why letting employees off the hook for their errors or lack of performance can only be used occasionally. If overused, offenders will take advantage of it. As someone who manages people, I have seen that. And it's no good. For leaders to try entrapping employees in minor rule infractions, that seldom makes sense. Serious big-time or illegal actions are certainly a different matter. However, bad leaders love to entrap employees. The opposite of letting people off the hook. The off-the-hook strategy cannot be used successfully when company rules and policies are willfully broken or for mission-critical matters. For that, off-the-hook strategies work when decisions and bad behaviors that aren't considered damaging simply happen. He says, I once had a conversation with a supervisor who told me that she had clearly explained to a group of new hires the importance of being punctual and ready to work at a set time. Most of the new employees took on the responsibility to show up on time as required. However, over time, few employees became careless and began to arrive at work late. Rather than bust the employees for their lack of punctuality, as the supervisor said she would, she simply stood at their workspaces and looked at her watch without making any comments. They got the message, but they never knew when something might be said about the infractions. In this way, the supervisor temporarily let them off the hook, yet held more influence than if she had unrelentingly held them to the standard. In the long run, she achieved the correct response in addition to exercising greater influence, while not abandoning the standards. Alexander the Great once spared the life of a young soldier who had been caught sleeping while on duty. The crime was punishable by death. When the soldier was brought before Alexander for sentencing, Alexander asked the soldier for his name. The soldier replied that his name was also Alexander, to which Alexander the Great then said, "Either change your name or change your behavior." He spared the soldier. I'm sure it was a lesson the younger Alexander never forgot, nor did the other soldiers observing the incident. Thank you, E. Arthur Self, Ph.D., for that. Oh, now we're outside a cafe anyway, somewhere in Podcastro Valley, the last place on earth. thank you so much for listening. Half hour. This show's gone a half hour. Yikes. All right, we're going to wrap it up shortly. But look who's outside a cafe anyway, somewhere in Podcastro Valley. Did you see the podcast picture from the last show, by the way? The Fort Pulaski National Monument in Georgia. I was there 12 years ago. Gosh, that's such a cool picture. See all the past podcast pictures at MikesDailyPodcast.com. Hello, Michael Myers. It's Madame Rootabega, and I love your pictures. Oh! Did you ever get a dog tattoo? No. Would you get any kind of tattoo? No. Wait, we're doing this wrong. Did you enjoy all the stories I told about Easter and stuff? Yes. Do you like chocolate bunnies? Yes. Do you want this conversation to be over? No. Well, it's over. Next show, it's going to be the wonderful Chely Shoehart, Floyd the Floorman, and John Deere the engineer. Thanks for stopping by, guys. I didn't really have any time for you.
Hello there, Mike. This is Valentino, the parking attendant.
And it's Bison Bentley. Do you know that?
We wanted to wish everyone a happy Easter day.
Yeah, happy Easters. Do you know that? You can call me 336MM Daily. 3 plus 3 equals 6. MM is a Mike Matthews Daily, as in what this podcast has been now for just today. But we'll try and get back into a pattern soon. And you can hear my special show. There's a link at MikesDailyPodcast.com to hear the show. It's going to be live from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. tomorrow Pacific time. And you'll get to hear great music and me, and it'll be fun, yes.
Mike's Daily Podcast is written and produced and performed by Mike Matthews. His podcast is super easy to find. Download or listen to his show and read his blog at MikesDailyPodcast.com. Email Mike now at MikesDailyPodcast@gmail.com. See you tomorrow. Bye.
And that was episode 2229 on Rare 2229. Hear all the past podcasts at MikesDailyPodcast.com.